Now that was real education with the Schoolhouse Rock. But it is a week of technological disruption. I don't know if you guys have been following this at all, but
I've been following it a little bit obsessively today in between doing work, and I did quite enjoy the narrative.
So everyone's going, aha, we don't have a free market. It's designed for the wealthy. That seems to be the takeaway.
If there's a good takeaway, it's that. They're very clearly saying we cannot let the pigs run the farm.
Yeah, and then it's funny to see some like right-wingers, more populist right-wingers agreeing with like left-wingers. There's that nice exchange between AOC and Ted Cruz, right? I think Ted Cruz like had a little like pointing finger emoji down to AOC's like tweet and was just like, I fully agree. And then she retweeted and being like, well, you kind of incited people to try to have me killed. So like, I like to work with Republicans, but you're a douche, effectively.
That was a brief glimpse of a better world.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of an on-topic segue that we can make here, it's very much a disruption of an institution, an almost sacred institution, by means of new technology, which is something that I'm sure our discussion will at least bring up today, because in addition to Wall Street finance capital, the university is one of the few definitely sacred or at least having a sacred aura of an institution that still remains with us.
Yeah, I guess it's I mean, I don't really like that word sacred, but fine.
That was the most petulant I think I've ever heard you say. I don't like that word sacred, but fine. Fine.
How about imbued with fantasy?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Well, yeah, of
That
course.
A sublime object.
Yeah.
The transcendental object.
So our episode is entitled Do Not Go to Grad School. I don't know if all of us are going to say that.
Ooh. Nope.
I'm probably going to say that.
Nope.
You can make a case. You can make a case for it. But
I think this podcast should be called "Should You Go to Grad School?" ?
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, I don't know if I can fully get behind that message, but I mean,
you got to go for the assertions in the title first of all. And university is a scam. You have to admit.
So,
that.
Pills, give us your case, and then we can have some rebuttals.
Oh, is it gonna be 3 against 1?
No, I don't know.
no.
I think it'll be like 2 against 1, maybe 2.5.
I mean, for complexity's sake, like if an undergrad did come up to me and say, like, should I go get a master's degree? Should I go to grad school? Like, I would have to ask a series of questions before I could answer that. Like, I wouldn't just be like, yes, you should, or no, you shouldn't. Like, I would have to interrogate them a little bit, be like, well, like, what are your interests? What did you do? Like, I don't even know what kind of questions I would ask, because, yeah, I did it, but does my experience generalize?
That's exactly my thought, right? I think it's really individuated, and we'll probably talk about it, so I won't rant about it too much. But I would have to ask questions. I'd have to figure out who this person was, what their ambitions were, what their interests happen to be. And I don't want to be after that I would say yay or nay.
For now, it's don't do it, but maybe by the end, it'll be do it.
Well, the reason that I bring this up is it's one of the most frequent comments I get when I'm online, I guess, or questions. Should I? I'm thinking about it. What's your take? So here's my take, and I'm going to be taking a hard line, and you guys can maybe soften me up, or we'll bring this somewhere near the middle.
I'm excited for this hot, spicy take.
Give
it to me.
Horseshoe theory.
Already has his degree, by the way, not in the midst of one.
Yeah, has his PhD and is just like, don't do it, guys. Which is, I guess, a good position of authority to have that take, potentially, to have done it.
True, yeah. Better to have that and say it.
Yes, university is wonderful, but don't do it. But
yeah, it would be way more
good
suspicious
for your
if you.
soul.
It would be way more suspicious if you like had started a PhD and then dropped out, and then you were telling people like, don't go. But like the fact that you finished it definitely does add credibility. So yeah.
I'm a year 1 PhD, and this is all bullshit, I tell you.
All right, well, I'm going to take the line that not only is university a scam, I think we're talking post-undergrad.
Biggest scam since religion?
In general, though, I think that you have to understand this as a transaction because it costs money and you're exploited so that you can do this performative thing and get your honorific after your name. And I think it's not yet disrupted. What I'm arguing for is that it should be disrupted, can be disrupted, just like the sacred institution of Wall Street is reactively trying to clamp down on the disruption that's occurring this week. But also, universities are corrupt bureaucracies for 100 millionaire or billionaires to put their names on buildings.
Yeah.
for construction contracts from the cousins of board members. And they exist to launder these contracts and then to get endowment money that they can stick into Halliburton and get big bonuses for their board and CEOs, which I think is a better term for the people who run these institutions than president. So that's my initial case. It's a corrupt way to invest your time and your debt.
So because there are capital interests behind some universities, you're saying it's a scam?
What do you mean some universities?
Well, I mean, I think it's to lesser and greater degrees, right? Like, I think the American system is a particularly egregious example of that. But like Europe and Canada, like there's much less. I mean, there is a lot of that, but like the degree of it, like I mean, the billions of dollars we're talking about, like get less and less the more public your post-secondary education system is.
I was totally going to bring that up. I'm going to actually post this on our, even though it's a public episode, I want to put it on our Patreon because that's where we get like accurate feedback. So I do want to know if this applies also to our European, Indian, Australian listeners. I assume to like more greater or fewer degrees, but in at least a few European countries, undergrad and parts of postgrad are virtually free. So I think that would kind of dilute my argument a little bit if that were the case. So this is basically applying to our context and even more so to the American
Especially
context.
America. I mean, university is still relatively affordable to a Canadian. Like if you want to get a degree, it's, I mean, comparatively speaking. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like the elite Ivy League schools in America. I mean, I remember one time having a professor telling me, you know, Harvard is really a multi-billion-dollar organization with a little side hustle of educating students.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, most people I know who graduated from there, either or from one of those kind of institutions, either came from a huge amount of money, where it wasn't really an object, or they graduated with $250,000, $300,000 in debt, which is not really viable for many, since in order to get into that kind of debt, you also need people who are kind of loaning you that kind of money, which means that you're shit out of luck in most cases, right?
Well, the sort of traditional Western wisdom about this is that America is like fully capitalist and their tuition is out of control. Canada is sort of in the middle. We have tuition. I mean, I think like some of the eastern provinces are getting rid of it, but mostly we have like $6,000 a year tuition or something, and then Europe is like minus England. Europe is like fully socialist, and they will just sponsor you have state-sponsored education there, basically.
Yeah, in Quebec, if you're a Quebec resident, I think you can get tuition at like McGill or whatever university there for like under $2,000 a year. It's pretty cheap.
And we should also stipulate at the beginning, we are talking about probably just humanities PhDs. I was looking up stats, and all the stats are lumped in with each other, but we don't know anything about basically STEM doctorates, whether they're worth it or not. I'm sure they're probably more worth it than arts or humanities degrees or social sciences as well. So I think that's kind of what the thrust of our discussion is at, but there's not stats really on just humanities PhD specifically.
So we're talking about tuition fees, but most of that applies to undergrads.
Well, my loans would say otherwise, but like on top of tuition, you have cost of living, which is extremely high here in Toronto. So
That's true.
I mean, when you factor everything else in, yeah, it's really expensive. If I had $100,000 10 years ago, then I could have done all this and come out with zero, but I didn't.
So that we don't have to go around and like divulge our financial situation publicly, I think we can just stick with the average, because I checked this up today. The average for a PhD graduate of debt in Canada, at least, is $40,000.
Yeah, sounds about right.
And that's a 4-year undergraduate degree, and then grad school will add another 6 years on top of that.
That's just tuition, right? Actually going to the school, paying for your cost of living, etc. One of the things that I think it's worth noting about is that if you want to be an effective grad student, you're going to need to be armed with quite a bit more money, because people will tell you that if you want to be an effective grad student, that also means conferencing, which is going to mean you're going to need to spend at least a few $1,000s a year traveling to God knows what part of the United States for the big conference for your discipline and so on. You're also going to need to have the time to spend on writing papers, buying expensive books, joining expensive associations.
Yeah, then you have to join the association that's putting on the conference just to present at the conference. So it's
Exactly.
a scam. It's a pyramid scheme.
I don't
hold
think
on
it's a scam. I'm just saying, I'll get into this when I make my more general point, right? That if you want to be an effective grad student, you should be aware that, like anything else in life, the costs on the sheet of paper that you'll be presented with are just the surface costs. To do it properly or to do it effectively, you're going to need to throw a lot more money at it to get all you will out of it.
Could we also be a little bit clearer here on when we say tuition? Like, you're absolutely right, cost of living, but I will say, like, right off the bat, like, if you get into a PhD program that doesn't offer you funding, then you absolutely should not do it.
Oh,
Like, there's no fucking question about that.
we're all agreed. Do not go to grad school.
So like
This episode went quicker than I thought.
But I think, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners don't necessarily know how PhD programs work. So like, I feel like we should also be clear about like what we're talking about here. So at the undergraduate level, unless you have like crazy grades in high school, like, and even if you get a really good scholarship at the undergraduate level, you're maybe going to get like a couple hundred, maybe a couple $1,000s off of your tuition a year, at least in Canada. I don't know how it works in the States. I mean,
If you can
there's
row or play football or something, you
Yeah,
get a
yeah,
sports
sure.
scholarship.
Like, yeah, exactly. But like at the PhD level, or most programs have like a minimum funding package of, I don't know, like it's got to be like at least, I don't know, 18,000 a year, which is obviously not very much. Like that's the minimum. But my point is, like, let's not talk about it as if you're paying 100% tuition.
for the
That'd be pretty
purpose
generous, actually.
for the purpose of this discussion, we'll say,
Comparatively.
is it worth it? 40K in debt when you finish, because that's the average.
I'm going to add 2 qualifications, right? I think that you should go to grad school if you can get funding and if you're really passionate about the material. Those are the optimal conditions, right? Because if you can get a substantial amount of funding and you're passionate about the material, there are worse ways to spend 5-6 years in your 20s. Let's just put it that way, right? If you can't get funding and you find yourself in the kind of situation that Pills is talking about, where you're likely going to take on 40 grand in debt, that's a different kind of question, right? I think that you should do it in that circumstance if you're really passionate about the material, yes, but also if you think you're going to be able to find some way to monetize that degree in the future, right? Because you'll get a job, or because you'll move into a field where they're looking for researchers, or because you think that you're being able to get a scholarship in the future. If you don't think you can get monetized, that's a much bigger. If you don't think you'll be able to monetize it, it's a much bigger question, right? Because then you're essentially assuming a lot of debt to pursue a hobby, and I think you should think seriously about whether or not that's a wise life choice to make.
See, this is why I'm of a split mind on this. I've got a bit of the schizo split going on because of course I enjoyed my experience at grad school, but also
And
I think like this whole that's the one side, and the other side is like the neoliberalization of universities that's been going on since the 1980s has definitely impacted the quality of education that you get and the quality of our universities in general. So I think if the only thing standing in your way is money, but otherwise you'd like to go, and if you can't afford to, what we should be doing is lobbying our government to make education something for free for everybody, right? Is education a right, as the Americans believe? Then why do you have to pay so much for it? It's the same thing with healthcare. Why do you have to pay for it out the nose if it's also like a basic human requirement is to be educated? Obviously not up to the point of grad school level education. Not everyone needs that. But then from another perspective, in order to be competitive on the job market, you can't just have an undergraduate degree anymore. That's crazy going into this decade now.
Humanities, at least.
Well, if you have just an undergraduate degree in anything, like, first of all, I would say if you want to be competitive, okay, take the extra year or two and get a freaking master's degree, because why not? And then if you really love your shit, then go on to do another 4-year PhD. And if you're in a classic science program, you'll probably work with a professor and be able to work with them further into a postdoc, and then something may materialize for you job-wise down the road. Yes, the humanities is a very different story from that, though.
So let's keep our story to the humanities, because that's what we have our experience with. But the disruption argument to this is that anything you learn or anything that we learned, like we couldn't do this 10 years ago where you could just download books.
Yeah.
Or maybe you could. I didn't know about it. Now it's like easier than ever.
Yeah.
You can have access to all the same material that you were reading. The only thing that you're missing from a lot of parts of finding the stuff online, trying to read it yourself, trying to figure it out on yourself. The only thing you're missing is that I can see, you can correct me, but deadlines. So at that point, you're paying for a babysitter. Or the thing that actually matters is personal relationships. And I think that with a lot of the theory stuff that I'm seeing online, theorists coming out online, that's the thing that I think is kind of changing, that you can form relationships in community about kind of the thinkers that you like and the things that you want to study. So I want to put that out there as a disruption that I think will take a chunk out of the benefits of grad school and seminars, which is exactly that personal relationship that can be reproduced. Maybe not as well, but it can be reproduced without 40K debt.
Actually, that was going to bring me up to the point that I wanted to make, because one of the things that I think is often not talked about when it comes to should you go to grad school is personalities. There's usually a kind of reductive materialism to it, right? How much money is it going to cost? What are you going to get? And so on. Not what the kind of interpersonal experiences you're going to get are. And this is kind of going to be said in jest, but one of the things that you should consider is that graduate school tends to attract certain kinds of personalities. And you're likely to meet one of the 5 following people there.
Nice.
And I would say, if you think that you can slot yourself in with one of these 5 people, then that could actually be an incentive to you, because it means that there'll be a group that you can hang out with and you'll probably have a good time with, right? You'll meet the person who's basically loved undergrad because of the parties, the drinking, the drugs, all the kind of stuff. Wants the party to keep on going well into their 20s and possibly their 30s. And if you think you're that kind of person, then grad school will definitely have a lot to offer you, right? The next kind of person you'll meet that's a lot less pleasant is the ultra snob. And interestingly enough, these exist on the left and the right. You'll meet the Marxist ultra snobs, and they'll talk about how they're fundamentally different than the Straussians, when actually, if you were to get them into a room and they didn't know each other's political ideology, they would basically be the same white dude talking about how nobody reads the right books anymore. They're pretty annoying, but if you happen to think of yourself as a snob, that's where you want to go, right? Then you get like the ultra leftist, who's kind of the inverse of the snob, who basically sees the point of theory as being some kind of activism or academia, right? And he or she will always be more vegan, more socialist, more feminist, more woke than everybody else. And in a beautiful world, they'll be a very nice person. In a frustrating world, they'll be policing everyone's conversation. And if you think you're that kind of person, definitely go there.
Please don't. Please don't.
They're the ones who give you shit for not being outside during a labor action.
Exactly. Then there's the 4th kind of person who is very rare, but sometimes you'll meet them, and it's like the genuine scholar. And you'll meet them. They're really nice people. They're super passionate about their work. They'll love to fucking talk to you about it. And the only thing that's annoying about them is the fact that if you want to sit down and have a beer with them, you're going to have to fucking talk about Deleuze, right? At the very beginning, like, you got to broach their interests. You got to have that conversation. And once you can get past that, they're usually pretty good guys or women. And if you spend some time with them, they're really helpful if you want to know anything about that topic.
Or Rawls. How about we throw Rawls in there? So I'm not.
Yeah, sure. And then there's the last person.
Rawlsians are always nice people.
They are. Yeah, I've never met a mean Rawlsian. Met plenty of like mean Marxists, plenty of mean Straussians, never a mean Rawlsian. Then the last person that you'll meet sometimes is what I like to call the burnout. And the burnout is usually what happens when the partier hits like 35 to like 40. Still is trying to keep it going, but let's just be honest, it's not working anymore. And basically, they're just like kind of parasite in the institution, living off of TA ships, RA ships, and whatever free food they give away. And usually blaming the institution for why they're not graduating. But let's be honest, they don't know what they would do with their life if they happen to leave. So they'll just be there forever. Don't wind up like that person. They'll be there. They're usually harmless. And they can sometimes be funny because they'll tell you jokes about how things were back in the old days, right? So if you think you're one of these 5 people, or you can get along with one of these 5 people, you should go to grad school because you'll have a good time. If any of these people sounds too threatening or too frustrating, you should think twice. That's my word.
That's interesting.
I really appreciate the classifications and your preparation for this.
The true scholar.
I don't know if you guys want to add one, but I definitely want to add the careerist.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah, the
forgot about
careerist.
Sixth is the careerist. They are the person that you can't even tell really what their research is in, whether or not they're actually interested in it. It's all conferencing, publishing, following their supervisor around, meeting up with the people who are giving out course assignments, and
Strategic
you know what?
at all times.
Strategic at all times, but they actually tend to do pretty well.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. I would say kind of want to add to this is something I've said in the past. I think maybe even on a really early episode of the podcast, just that I think it's important to know what it is, and I think the careerist does tend to do well, but the problem with the careerist, I think like going into grad school, especially like a theory PhD, being like, I'm going to go so that I can get a job as a professor, I would say don't go. If that's like if that's your objective going into it, that you're like, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be a professor for sure. I think to some extent, like you have to, like you can go in, you just have to go in with some self-reflexivity about yourself and the current market.
Yeah.
So like that can't be your only reason. Like that can be your hope. That's certainly my hope. I mean, that's Matt's hope. I'm sure, and like to have a tenure track job. I mean, but I think that if you go in being like, I'm going to do this because I'm going to get a job, you're kind of misunderstanding the job market and like what it actually entails and what's necessary. I think you have to go in both with the idea that I'm doing this because I love it, because I don't want to be working in a cubicle in some job.
Yeah.
And I would rather, and if you are strategic enough about like getting scholarships and going to a university that gives you a generous funding package, it's difficult. It's not easy, but you can live and not have debt. That's possible. You can, if you like manage to get scholarships, right? You can. There are ways of doing it and getting a living wage. And if you can manage to do that, and you don't have this expectation that you're gonna get a job right after, and you're kind of realistic, and you can hedge a little bit, it can be an amazing experience. And I would strongly recommend it in those circumstances. Because I certainly don't want to live in a cubicle working in some office, and like that's kind of the choice.
Yeah. I agree with
Part-time job is a real good idea. That's what I did. I just
I mean,
want to
most of
also,
us did.
because you mentioned it, I looked up these stats as well. In 2015, of graduated PhDs, so not beginning, but graduated PhDs, 1 in 5, I think this is Canada, StatsCan, 1 in 5 eventually got tenure track. It didn't say when. We know a bunch of people that are like in their mid 40s that are still gunning for tenure track, do not have it. So 1 in 5, if that's your goal, you have a 20% chance in 2015. But since 2015, every single year, the number of PhD graduates has gone up in both the United States and Canada, and the amount of jobs has stayed the same or gone down. So if it was 1 in 5 years ago, it's even lower now, and it's going to keep getting lower. So if you're thinking about starting now, that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's some variance there for sure, and like depending on where you go and what you focus on. Like a quick example, I mean, this isn't the theory job market, but I'm situated in a political science department doing political theory. But it's interesting because my political science colleagues in my department, there's one specialization at the University of Toronto where almost everyone gets a job if they specialize in that, and that is Canadian politics.
Yeah,
So if you want to study Canadian
So
politics, you'll get a job, tenure
I
track
regret
job, pretty much right away, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, so I also kind of want to say that for me, like going to grad school, like we were talking earlier, I mean, Pills brought up the point, what is the disruptive point about like all these things are available online. I kind of want to make an impassioned, like, just, I don't know if a plea or an impassioned argument necessarily, but just that I think there's something really fundamentally different and special about the seminar room, about the experience in the seminar room. I don't really think that can be reproduced online.
The new sublime object.
I mean, I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. Like there's an inner subjective. I mean, there's a phenomenology that's different about being in the room with people, talking, having a professor that's conducting the discussion in like a reciprocal and dialogical fashion that is, a special experience that I remember, going into it and like having those experiences. It doesn't happen all the time where you're like, okay, like this is why I'm here. These are the kinds of experiences to talk about theory. So that's one thing, the seminar room. And then obviously like the experience of going to the bar after seminar with your friends to talk about theory more. I mean, those are some of the best memories. The other thing I would say too is that that's also fundamentally different from the I mean, Pills, you touched on it when you said deadlines. I think it's a little more than deadlines. I think that's true, but it's also having someone who's going to read your work and give you feedback that is different. Like, yes, you can read theory, you can watch videos about theory, and like you can get a lot out of it. But I will just say for myself that I like that feeling you get after you write a paper and you get feedback on it. Like, that is a different level of learning than just like watching or reading a video. Like, I feel like you don't really learn it. Similar to like the experience you get from having to teach something, having to write about something and use it in like your own creative endeavor to make an argument is fundamentally different than just reading the arguments and being like, oh, this is interesting. Like, writing it, putting to work can't really replace that.
That I agree with. So we have to replicate that. So we'll add. How about we add a Patreon tier where you get to write papers for no credit?
And we'll grade them.
Yes.
And we'll grade them. You know what? That's not. I would be totally open
Seminar
to that.
tier.
Pills you, yeah.
Wait, really?
If you want to start a Patreon tier where people submit their work and like we have to like grade it and give feedback, I would definitely be open to being part of that.
Well, hey, look, PragerU fucking created a fake university. Why can't we? We are better qualified to create a fucking fake university in social science or humanities than PragerU is.
Yeah, the Plastic
do it.
Pills Seminary.
The Plastic Hill Seminary, yeah. Yeah. No, I tend to agree with Victor, though. I think that there are a lot of things about grad school that simply can't be emulated online yet. And that's not a diss at, online forums. I
Yet
think that
they
there's a
will
lot of
never
things.
be replicated. I don't think. You need the intersubjective, the phenomenology, being in the presence of other bodies. Can't be replaced.
Yeah, but I mean,
What if we had philosophy retreats?
Yeah, that
Philosophy
could work. Sorry.
camp.
Anyway, sorry, I cut you off there.
This sounds like the most dorky thing I could imagine, but it would be fun. You got to admit.
I think the most important thing about this, though, is genuinely getting professional feedback. And this is something that I find you don't see as consistently in a lot of these online forums, where there's a little bit more of a kind of anarchic, anything goes type mentality. And there's fine. There's a nice kind of democratic quality to that. But when it comes to producing high tier reflective work, there is something said to be said for somebody who's got a lot of experience, who's been in the field for a long time, who knows it really well, and who's going to take your work and basically tell you, like, this is crap. You don't know what you're thinking about. You have a lot to learn. So here's what you got to do. And I remember I had to go through this during my undergraduate degree and through grad school, right? A lot of people would say, like, you're just wrong about this. You don't know what you're talking about. And that really hurts and it's really frustrating. But then you fail and you fail again and you fail better. And then eventually at some point, you're the guy who sits there and you have a few things of interest to say, right? And I'm not sure that you can create that same kind of environment in an online setting, because quite frankly, if somebody on Twitter or on a forum said your work is crap, I'd probably just tell them, well, you can go fuck yourself, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
What the fuck do you think you know, right? Who are you to tell me that?
God, I agree with that so strongly. Like, I think, to use kind of, almost Alan Bloom like lofty language about academia, and even though I'm opposed to him, I do think that there's something important about the development of an intellectual of an intellectual soul that requires being pushed down to size by someone who knows better and having some intellectual humility. And I think that the problem with online forums and like, they read it and then they think they know it, but where is the development for intellectual humility? In fact, I would say online, there's very little intellectual humility.
I'll take your side for just this one statement, at least, or one point. I'll take your side for this one point, and that's that, especially in interdisciplinary courses, if you can get them. Like, I took courses in film and in history and in religion, and that to me is invaluable, because even though they're your peers, they're actually experts in something, and they're like semi-experts, whereas you're not. And if you go find like a Deleuze reading group or something, then you just know by default everyone there's going to like Deleuze. So you wouldn't even not just push back from professors, but push back from people who you fundamentally disagree with. And that's an environment that I've only encountered so far in the university, because online forums are up to you. You choose where to go and what to consume. However, I don't think that could not be replicated online also.
Maybe.
Well, I'll just give you an example, and maybe this will entice Eric to join our side, right? Think about like all the crappy books that are written by like pop intellectuals about social justice activism, postmodern theory, you name it, right? I hate to say it because I've read a ton of these, right? But most of the ones that are like truly god awful, like just fucking deserve to be on like the manure pile, are written by people who didn't have like a strong academic background, and you can tell because all they're used to doing is like catering to their audience, right? They know that the people who read this are primarily going to be converted to their side already, so they don't have to make any kind of effort to actually try to convince somebody to believe something that they didn't believe already, right? That's very different than the handful of books I've read in this subgenre that are actually good, almost all of which are written by academics. And you can see it, right? People like Alan Sokol, because they treat the material like an academic. They say, I've gone through Deleuze's paper, and I've gone through Baudrillard's paper, and I've gone through this, here are the citations, and this is why I think they're wrong. And you might sit there and think, well, I still disagree with the interpretation, or they're not being particularly charitable, but it's leagues apart than all the crap that you sometimes get from like these kind of pop intellectuals who write books on the subject matter. And I've seen similar patterns emerge everywhere else. And that's not to say that you need a degree to write a good book on an intellectual subject matter. And I could point to other examples where people have written good books who don't have like a formal education. But it definitely helps, right? Particularly if you're going to be writing about political material, where the temptation can always just be to cater to like a very partisan audience that'll swallow anything that regurgitates what they happen to believe already, right?
Yeah.
Eric, what are you thinking of?
Well, this is a topic I am very conflicted about. So I don't have a rough and ready opinion about the whole thing. I mean, yes, I think undergrad and graduate education is pretty much essential to modern society. Like we can't get by without it. But on the other hand, like if you're a dedicated autodidact, you can teach yourself this stuff, then like good on you. You don't need to do it. You could become an independent scholar. You can prove yourself in other ways. But I mean, let's face it, like most people aren't that. Most people can't do it on their own. Like I sign up for classes in the gym because I can't fucking work out myself because I find it boring. I have no motivation. I need to go somewhere and have someone tell me what to do.
You don't need to work out,
even
baby.
if
You look perfect the way you are.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Jesus.
Even if I know what to do, even if I know exactly what to do, I won't do it because I don't have the motivation. I can't do it myself. I need the classroom. I need the structure. I need just to be somewhere other than my house or in a cafe because it's also distracting. Like feedback helps, yeah. Like any kind of constructive criticism is great if you treat it in the right way and actually go back and read it.
Yeah.
But I mean, also, I don't necessarily miss the seminars or this like 90% of the people at university I didn't care for. I didn't enjoy them. I met a few people and that was great, but like most people, I'm like, fuck these people. I don't give a shit about them. They're fine people, but I don't want to know them.
I think that we, in terms of technological disruption, because so much of this stuff is now available that wasn't available even 10 years ago, or even like 50 years ago when the universities owned all the books, pretty much, and it was difficult to find even what you should read if you wanted to. I think I can hypothesize that we can foresee there being a generation of non-credentialed theorists, and they're probably 20 right now, and most of them won't do it. But you got to assume that there's going to be that autodidact out there who really can get it.
Most people who think they're an autodidact are not autodidacts, though.
Yeah.
This is to the 20-year-olds. You're probably not as smart as you think you are. But there's probably a 20-year-old out there who is actually as smart as...
Never forget that, 20-year-olds.
I spend a lot of time on Twitter, and generally speaking, anybody who has a hashtag that goes something like self-taught philosopher, inevitably you start watching their videos, and it's basically like academia is a Ponzi scheme, academics don't know what they're talking about, academics, don't have real ideas because they're too afraid of the system, my IQ is 180, natural selection indicates that, I'm on the top of the pecking order, hashtag, Jordan Peterson, hashtag Ayn Rand, and then you actually read their stuff, and it's just like a bunch of malarkey.
I'm not saying that the person knows that they're going to be that. I'm just saying that they're probably out there. People nose to the grindstone, on their own, able to teach themselves, able to build themselves a structure and discipline and all that stuff. I think they're out there, and they're not going to have a PhD in 20 years.
I'm sure that'll happen. Yeah.
It's worth noting that like academic philosophy, just to use one example, right, only really emerged starting in like the 19th century, right, when Kant kind of formalized this idea of being, the professor of philosophy who also writes the main books of philosophy. A lot of like the major figures before that never went to school, or at least didn't train in the discipline specifically.
A lot of them were trained by the church in seminaries.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's certainly not like it's not impossible to do, right? I agree with you 100%. And I should say, like, I'm a huge fan of the promulgation of the democratization of ideas that we see in this new era, right? What I just get concerned about sometimes, and I think Victor shares this worry, is that too much of that will lead to falling standards and people not recognizing that, no, there's good ideas and there are bad ideas. And one way you take bad ideas and you turn them into good ideas is sometimes getting feedback that you don't necessarily want to hear from somebody who just might happen to know a little bit more than you do about the subject matter. And like, there's no shame in that either. Like when I always tell my students, like I teach legal theory right now. My first legal theory paper, I got a D on it because I wrote a whackload of stuff about Aristotle and Kant that made no fucking goddamn sense. And the prof was just like, look, this doesn't make any sense. You need to focus in on your ideas. You need to like choose a topic and a theme and go with it. And I didn't like to hear that, but it was good advice. You know what I mean? And I got my ass kicked a few more times through my undergraduate degree, all the way up through my PhD. And eventually you start to develop a thicker skin to it and you learn some things, right?
Yeah,
it's a helpful process.
When you're in academia, you're always going to be getting feedback that it's harsh. That's the nature of it. That's another thing that I would say. Like, if you're somebody who has a hard time taking critical feedback, then definitely don't go to grad school. Like, definitely do not come. Like, you shouldn't be here because it's going to be. That's the value you get is from like harsh criticism. I mean, even not that long ago, I had a professor look at my dissertation proposal, and he was just like, "I don't see why this matters. Like, I don't understand this shit happens all the time."
That's always a fun one. It's just like, I don't see why you're studying is important. That's always fun.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like you just whatever.
If you can't take constructive criticism, you're not going to succeed in any job anywhere. If you're a waiter and you can't take criticism, like I think you're going to get fired pretty quickly.
I remember that formative moment also. Bringing in a draft of a proposal. I can't even remember if it was for the dissertation or whatever, but you see the face of your supervisor looking at you. His eyebrows are kind of close together and goes, "Sorry, but you really don't know what you're talking about."
Yeah,
it was a formative moment.
Well, but I think there's a certain kind of personality, and this goes back to like the 5 types that I was talking about in grad school, that gravitates towards it, where they associate it with kind of expressivist ethic where it's like, oh, I'm going to go explore ideas that are really meaningful to me, and I'm going to write something that's extremely personal. It's going to tell people who I am and what my philosophy is. And that's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with trying to do that in theory or in principle. But it's also important to recognize that if you go to grad school, you're not there to write your fucking blog, right? You're there to learn how to construct ideas and present them properly, which means that if you just write something about how you feel this way about something or what your personal insights happen to be, people are going to judge you for it. And they should, because that's the way that you'll improve and refine the ideas that underpin those kinds of expression and those kinds of sentiments.
I mean,
right?
I'm tempted to bring in the idea that I hear a lot from people about not going to grad school, why you shouldn't go to grad school, maybe even why you shouldn't even get an undergraduate degree or go to university, is because they're going to say that so many of these successful people in society don't have degrees, or they dropped out of university, or they didn't complete this or that or whatever. They're going to point at like directors and actors and
Zuckerberg
business leaders
thing,
and all kinds of people like that, and say like, what's the point of going to grad school if you have a good idea, chase it, drop out if you need to, and go after it. And like, school is just an extension of grad school is just an extension of undergrad, which is an extension of high school, and just drop out when you get something better.
But I think that's more possible in some fields than others, though.
In terms of falling standards, though, that's happening anyway, and we could blame the big bad words, the neoliberalization of the university.
I always blame
but
that,
one thing we can turn to in light of that is that grad students are accepting anyone to these studies doesn't mean you're good or smart. Actually, they don't even care if you're smart. No matter how smart you think you are, that propels your career exactly nowhere unless you're talking you already have like a job pretty much. That's my observation. The smartest people I know often struggle very much. But
Yeah, I've noticed
so
that too.
the reason that they let you in is because you are cheap labor for the university to take care of their undergrads so that they don't have to hire tenure track positions, which is why the tenure track position count goes down every year because they offload it onto you as a grad student. And I don't think any of us would say we even hate teaching or we didn't get paid what we were worth or anything like that. That's like the best part. One of the best parts is getting to teach, but you're not rewarded for that nearly as much as, you're exploited from your labor, how much they pull in on that and then offload it to you, and increasing responsibilities offloaded to you.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'm going to say the 4 reasons why I think you shouldn't go to grad school, just in the interest of fairness. And some of these are going to be kind of funny, but like some of them have like a serious core to them. Number 1 is if you're like me, your liver will age at least twice as much as it needs to, right? And that's a fairly
Faster
common
than the
experience.
rest of your body.
Yeah, a lot faster than it needs to. That's a pretty common experience I know with a lot of grad students. There's joy in that also, right? But just be aware of that, right? The second thing, and this relates to what Pills was talking about, is you absolutely should not go to it if you're thinking that this is going to be a meal ticket, right? Like I said, you should try to find a way to monetize it because that's just sensible. But there's no guarantees in life, and there's less so in grad school than in many other things, right? The third reason why I think you shouldn't go to grad school is because there is a huge amount of exploitation that goes on in the academy. And this is one of the things that I think is extremely frustrating about it, right? For all the kind of accusations people make about grad school being a haven of postmodern cultural Marxists or whatever it happens to be, it's an extremely competitive neoliberal environment where there's an extraordinarily rigid hierarchy with the people at the bottom who get very little and the people at the top who almost always get a great deal.
And that's after you graduate. Then
that's after
then
you
you try to
graduate.
get a postdoc, and then you just do someone's bitch work for them. Actually, I shouldn't use that term. What do you call it when you just do the work
Grunt
that they
work?
don't want to do? Grunt work. Okay.
Grunt work, yeah. And the last thing, and this is associated with it, and it's something that I think all of us find frustrating, right, is because academia is an extremely competitive neoliberal environment. Maybe it's always been this way. I don't want to just blame it on economics. You're going to meet an awful lot of pretentious douchebags there. Just fucking swarms of them, right? They'll be around you like flies. They're going to always sit there and ask how many publications you have, where you publish, where you're getting a postdoc, even in casual conversation. And you just know that they're registering in their mind how they compare to you. It's a really unpleasant thing. And you have to be prepared to have a thick skin in that kind of environment, like Victor was saying, because people are going to judge you constantly. Right. And it's not a really nice
Can I also
feeling.
just add to that too, that when it comes to like pretentious douchebags, like I think one thing that I've found useful is you kind of realize, like when you talk to grad students, that actually most grad students, especially even the ones who come off as a little bit pretentious, are incredibly insecure.
Yeah.
Grad
that's
students
for sure.
are so fucking insecure. It's crazy. Like if you know that going in, like you can just feel, but you just have to remember that because everyone thinks everyone else. It's kind of like the Lacanian, like I guess we lost Derek, but it's kind of like the Lacanian audience. It's like we imagine that everyone else like knows. The subject's supposed to know, I think, is the thing, that everyone else knows and everyone else is like gets it. But the thing is, everyone thinks that, and it's a big like reciprocal, it's like a self-reinforcing cycle of insecurity and self-loathing. So like if you realize that that's what's going on, you can feel a lot better.
Like we've all hung out with that guy at the bar who at the start of the night will be a perfectly normal, good guy to talk to. Starting around 9:30, he's going to be talking about how he's a genius, how he's revolutionizing everything, how you don't know to lose as well as he does, so shut the fuck up. But then circa 1 o'clock, it's going to come full circle, and he's going to sit there and be like, I'm nothing, I'm a failure,
Imposter
I can't do
syndrome.
anything. And it's all part and parcel of the same cycle, right? Like the insecurity feeds into the ego, which feeds back into the insecurity because you don't think you're good enough. And everybody feels that way to a certain extent. What I was just getting at is some people have that syndrome to the umpteenth degree,
Well, I was just gonna say that like it just, if you notice that cycle going on, like you can kind of like get out of it, because if you just realize that everyone around you like is thinking the same way, and if not, they're probably like more insecure, like you can often feel better. But yeah, like definitely it does feel like there's a feeling like everyone around you knows so much, but really everyone else is feeling that too. Like everyone else thinks that everyone else knows better than them, and it's just like that's just how it feels. But
And the reality is within 2 or 3 years, anybody who's studying something like seriously will know vastly more about it than you will. Like everybody will usually start off from a place of relative equivalence. So there might be somebody who just knows generally more about everything in the discipline than you will. But like 3 years down the line, if you've done nothing but study Rawls or Deleuze or whatever the fuck it happens to be, you're going to know more about that subject matter than pretty much anybody else will because you've committed to it.
And
right?
I got to stress as well that success has nothing to do with intelligence. And I hear people kind of bring this up. The people that you're talking about, they think, I have the best interpretation of this. This person's wrong. This person's wrong. This person's wrong. And they're usually the ones who are, they drop out because they're like, why does no one here recognize my brilliance? School's not for me.
Yeah.
That is definitely a character. I don't know if it fits into your snob character, but they're the snob that knows or thinks they're that intelligent. Even if they are, that has no bearing on your success as an academic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think going into grad school, and I
think we're thinking of the same person, Pills.
I tell this to people, to undergrads who are thinking about applying to grad school, that you have to go in. No, like you can't just go into it being like, well, I'm getting A's and A pluses on everything, so that means I should get a PhD. Like that's just like the wrong approach. Like,
yeah.
So there are really smart people who go in who are really good at writing papers and are really good, but yeah, like doing a PhD and like trying to like take a stab at academia, there's a whole game that goes on that you have to be good at, and I think that's kind of what Pills is getting at when he says that it's not the smartest people who do all that. Now, I will like slightly push back on him in just saying that intelligence does have something to do with it, because I don't think like. I don't know. Maybe you're going to challenge me on this, but I've never come across someone who ends up being successful who I thought was stupid. Like I think, but you're right that like the really like intelligent minds who blew me away, maybe like they maybe weren't the ones who end up being successful because they're so caught up in their own lofty ideas, but they're terrible at the game of academia.
Yeah, you have to be a gamer, a strategic game player to do the right things to get ahead. That's getting noticed, first of all. Doing your work, meeting the right people, the networking thing. None of this, like, I want to kind of purge people's, what I think are their fantasies about academia, because it's nothing like what you think if you think the smartest person is the one with the credentials, because that's just not the case. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is in terms of hierarchy, you work with people that got tenure in like 1970, just total senile geriatric idiots that are still there.
I like those people.
You have to be like obsequious. It's just ass kissing. Otherwise, to get ahead.
With some of those guys.
Okay, I TA'd for a guy, like big name, published books name, and we had a lecture on Marx. It's like a fourth year class lecture on Marx Day, and he talked about the Soviet Union the entire time. We had to do a reading from like Marx Capital, Volume 1, and we talked about the Soviet Union the entire time. People complained, the students were complaining about it, the other TAs were complaining about it, and nothing ever can happen to these people, despite what they do. Like sexism, racism, you name it, they can do whatever they fucking want. 80 years old, terrible reviews, he's going to be there till he's dead.
Well, yeah, I do think that maybe there's an argument for mandatory retirement at a certain age, maybe like 75 or something, because like, sure, there's a couple professors, but for the most part, I got to say I'm more with Matt that like, usually I find the old-timey academics to be pretty delightful and fun, at least. Maybe I've just got lucky and had good ones.
You go and get a beer with them, and like they'll tell you like all the shit about like some of your heroes. Like I went out with a guy who's like, yeah, I fucking got a drink with fucking like Derrida. You know what? He was a fucking prick, and you know, like blah 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 blah, and then they'll explain.
Wait, is that a real story? Was Derrida a prick? I've never heard that.
The guy who told me this was like, he's flamboyant, thinks a lot of himself, all that stuff. To be fair, he was like anti-Derridian, so it might have been biased, right? But what I'm saying is like, they're like older people anywhere. They have interesting stories sometimes. Every now and then they go on and on and on. But like, since you tend to be interested in the same things, a lot of times if they ramble, it's about stuff that you're kind of at least somewhat invested in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely TA'd for an old-timey professor who actually did his PhD at U of T, and he got there, right, I think for like the last year when Alan Bloom was still at U of T, and he told me he was just like, oh my God, what an arrogant prick that guy was. Like,
I'm shocked to hear that. Yeah. I really am.
I'd just like to highlight the fact that if you're in an undergraduate degree and you will never be able to talk to your professors. Like they'll run in, they'll lecture, and then the Secret Service will come and escort them, and they'll fly away in a chopper. Like you'll never get to fucking see them. But in graduate degree, where there are far less people, you get a lot more FaceTime with professors.
Yeah.
You have a lot more access to your department and people in it, right? You don't have to. You're not sitting in a room and you're just a number with like 300 other people around you. That was one of the things that I enjoyed about grad school, I think, was that the access to the professors that you have was on a completely different level. So if you're interested in your field and you want to go on to do graduate studies, like it's a great thing because you get to finally talk to these people. And yes, you're a little bit older. Like as a professor, I might be a little hesitant. I mean, I'm not a professor, but if I were, I might be a little hesitant to go out with like a 19-year-old undergraduate or even a 21-year-old 20. But like the grads are usually in their later 20s. They're a little more mature. And so you end up going out for drinks with them. Going out for drinks with your professor is not something that tends to happen in undergraduate degree.
Yeah.
So that's a nice thing.
For sure.
The access, the exclusivity,
The socializing.
Yeah, you get to and it weeds out, like you hear in your undergraduate, you know, like those fuck up kids in high school are at the back of the room and they don't give a shit and they holler at you and they're bullies and shit. They're not there. And then in grad school, even the less motivated people aren't there. It's just people who love what they're doing, and it's professors who actually want to engage with you. So that can be nice.
And who will actually try to help you, right? I mean, I was just a number to fucking 90% of like my undergrad professors. It was really only like some of the ones in like the upper year classes, which
when
were
you get to
smaller,
those
like
capstone
50.
courses, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But like by the time you get to grad school, like I have profs that I still keep in touch with nowadays, and they've been really helpful to me, right? Like they'll write letters of reference. If there's a job that's coming up, they'll send me some links to it. Like if there's some project that I'm working on, every now and then they'll be like, hey, do you want to write something like this? There's kind of a collaborative thing to it. And there's a lot of advantages to that you couldn't really get unless you were in that environment. You know what I mean? And it's a professional environment, which is why you see these things emerging. Right?
Can I also add in like two more types of people who shouldn't go to grad school? I have like two, which I may have kind of mentioned a version of a long time ago, but so like there's the one who comes in who just likes the idea of getting a PhD, right? I think we've all come across those people who didn't know what they were, who didn't like have a good reason for being there other than the fact that they always did well in classes. So they're like, well, I guess I should get a PhD. So definitely that's a bad reason.
I think that one might be me.
That one might be more common though in like non-theory. Like I notice it with some political science people I know that they're just like, well, I was always doing well, so I guess I'll do a PhD, and they kind of like the way it sounds in their ears. They're like, doing a PhD, that sounds cool.
Yeah, I want to add just to that because it's very true. Like one thing that you can get that is good about doing a PhD is if you're not doing anything else with your life, it will silence like all the naysayers in your family, because at least because like all your uncles, all the people who are making more money than you will probably at least be like not intimidated, but like somewhat respectful of the fact that you're doing a graduate degree. So it doesn't matter that you're making like $20,000 and living in a basement,
specifically
with
a PhD,
5 other people. Yeah, they'll be like, oh, well, he's doing his PhD. He must be doing something with his life.
What's the other type, Victor?
The other type, which I've mentioned before, is kind of like the academic romantic, I suppose. It's like the one who comes in and they're like, oh, I'm going to change this field. I'm going to have the new theory that's going to like, I found this new thing in Descartes that no one's ever noticed, and everyone's going to respect me, and I'm going to write the most important works, right? Like, I think actually, to add to a point I was making earlier, that Pills like touched on the fact that the ones who end up succeeding usually aren't the smartest. It's because I think the smartest ones also often, not always, but often are plagued by a kind of perfectionism that they're like, I'm only going to submit something if it's perfect. I'm only going to submit something if I think it's... Whereas the ones who end up succeeding are much better at being pragmatists and being like, yeah, I know this argument has flaws, but like, it's cool. I'm going to send it to this journal. I'm going to send it to this journal and see what happens. I'll just send it. They're just sending, right? And like, that's the kind of the approach you have to have. You have to be a pragmatist, whereas perfectionists are the type who is like, I'm going to do important work that's going to change the field, right? They're never satisfied, and they're too scared to send anything because they want it to be like the perfect groundbreaking thing. So if you have that personality type, don't do it.
I'm not sure if that's
that.
true,
Okay,
though. I mean, I definitely know those people that are like, I'm going to change. I'm going to change Schelling studies. I'm going to change.
We are talking about the same person. I fucking fellas, I knew it. I knew we were talking about the same person. Knew it.
I am gonna change Hegel studies with this thesis that I have. And even if they publish that, I mean, A, the likelihood is that it's not as good as they think it is. And B,
never.
Even if it is that good, people don't read stuff. My dissertation committee did not read my entire dissertation, and I could tell by the questions that they asked me, where I could defer, like, okay, well, I wrote about this in chapter 4. But I could tell, no, they read chapters 1 and 2, never even finished it. So if you're expecting people to take you seriously because you take you seriously, not going to happen. Even if you write the best thing ever, does not matter. You're not going to change a field, even if you have the best idea.
I do agree with you that a lot of people do have this kind of perfectionist streak, which makes it difficult for them to actually be productive, right? But I do think that actually this indicates more than just a personality type. I think it's been a bit of a shift in the way the academic environment has moved towards a neoliberal model, right? Because if you think about the way that academia used to be, actually this is related to the kind of perfect anecdote I used to make, right? There used to be this sense that you graduate, you get tenure, you'd have a secure job, and therefore you'd have the time and the resources to sit there and really work on something for a long period of time, and there wouldn't be intense pressure put upon you to produce as long as what you did down the line was good enough. And the example I usually give is something like Rawls's theory of justice, right? Went to an Ivy League school. He basically had 15 years where all he did was publish a few papers, then work on this book. It was published. It was clearly thought through really well, and became a hit, right? Nobody, no institution in the world I can think of, with the exception of a handful of Ivy League schools, would say, don't publish anything for 15 years, just work until you get the ideas right. You know what I mean? Take your time. They'd sit there and be like, are you fucking crazy? Like, you've got to publish like minimum 2 papers a year, and you should be working on a book, and you should be going to a conference, and you should also be sitting there and thinking about getting like your public persona out there now to like attract the kids these days by doing things like this,
and a
right?
prestigious funding grant.
Yeah, so there's just
Here's
really
the
not
achievement
incentive to
society
take time on
aspect of it that we've already discussed.
Yeah, the achievement.
Can I read a quote
And I
from
think-
Deleuze? It's short.
Sure.
Okay, Deleuze, what is philosophy? He writes on this. He's talking about all the rivals that philosophy, true philosophy, the creators of concepts have had. Sociology was the first rival to philosophy in saying that they create concepts. But for him, I think he wrote this in 92, 93 or somewhere around there. And he says, finally, the most shameful moment of rivals to philosophy came when computer science, marketing, design, and advertising, all the disciplines of communication, seized hold of the word concept and said, this is our concern. We are the creative ones. We are the ideas men. We are the friends of the concept. We put it in our computers. Information and creativity, concept and enterprise, there is already an abundant bibliography. So much, like Matt just said, so much of this being an academic is actually the marketing aspect. It's not about the ideas or creating concepts in Deleuze's sense. And I don't even want to get into a debate over whether or not Deleuze is right about that. But so much of what we're saying is that if you are an ideas person, if you love ideas, and this is what you kind of get off on, university is not necessarily about that. It might be one of the few places where you can even get a glimpse of that, but it's certainly not all about that. And success in university is not based on whether or not you're a good thinker, a lot of the time. If you're a poor thinker, you're going to fail immediately. But even if you're a good thinker, it doesn't mean you'll succeed.
Definitely agree with that.
But we fetishize genius in this society of ours. And we love stories about metaphysical clubs and Yale groups and all kinds of
The Cambridge Apostles. Yeah.
super successful, brilliant people who came up with some groundbreaking theory and overturned the field. Derrida's paper in 1968 or whenever it was groundbreaking and established a new field. We love
Or the
that shit. We
Toronto
eat it up.
School of Communications theory. Walter Ong, Marshall McLuhan, Harold Innis.
But this is what I mean. Part of that's an environment that's disappearing right now, even though the kind of idealized image of it, like Eric was saying, hasn't gone away. Like, think about Wittgenstein, right? Wittgenstein wrote one 80-page book, published one academic article, and then came back to Cambridge, and they're like, yeah, you can stay around for as long as you want. Just, teach a class every now and then, and when you think you have a good enough idea for a new book, we'll publish it then. Never did anything. All his other stuff was published posthumously, right? But it's all brilliant because he had a certain amount of time to sit down, reflect, talk to students, prepare things, and then put them out when they're ready, right? I mean, I'm not sure if you feel the same way, Vic or Eric, but like, if I were to go to my fucking department and be like, I'm not planning on publishing anything for 20 years. I'm just going to sit down and really think about my ideas. And then when they're ready, I'm going to present them to the world. They would sit there and be like, well, here's the door, right? Just please, don't fucking bump into anybody on the way out. Right?
No, you have to be doing right now, like, and it's true. I mean, right now, to be a productive academic, you have to be doing these mildly, and I'll put it, very critically, to please pills over here, that, like, you can do these mild, like, everyone has to do these mildly, like, circle jerky journal articles where they, will say, okay, here's what the literature is saying right now. Here's what this other person's saying now. I've identified an inconsistency or a gap between what these two voices are, or there's a gap here because they didn't notice this little interpretation in Rawls's Justice is Fairness where there's an inconsistency with, like, political liberalism, or like some little fucking small, like, on the head of a pin needle thing. And it's like, you have to always be producing, and then, or you talk about what the contemporary literature is doing and how they're not paying attention to this one little detail. And like, you're expected to publish, at least 2 of those a year or something once you're.
But that's progress. That's how academia works, by little tiny steps and little niggling, little pedantic little points like that. That's how, like, not everyone who comes along just flips the frickin' table. It's not like from Galileo to Derrida. It's all the stuff that happens in between.
No, for sure.
The important, like, reading and writing and scholarship is boring. You're basically like a wizard in the basement of a library. Like, that image is still pretty accurate. You're not doing some grand thing. You're working out little tiny logical inconsistencies, or you're looking at contradictions, or you're looking at little
I actually
obscure.
agree.
Part of that is also
Yeah.
the humanities trying to imitate the success of the sciences and saying, this is a rigorous, logical discipline and it's advancing forward, which I it's impossible to make the case for
Sciences
that.
looks like that too. Like, if there's a mistake
Yeah.
in somebody's formula, in somebody's biological recipe for some kind of whatever, if there's a little tiny mistake in that could have huge ramifications. And we don't think about it. It's not as important in the humanities because we deal with ideas. We don't deal with formulas or chemistry or physics. So it's not as important if we get a little bit wrong. But it is. It should be. Like, what's the difference between an idea and a thing?
I don't think it is as different in the STEM fields as we sometimes make it out to be. Like, my brother-in-law, and he's actually my brother-in-law now, I can say that, is doing his degree in particle physics, right? He's almost done his PhD. Really smart guy. I sometimes ask him, kind of just like, what's your work a day like? And it's exactly the same thing. He's like, people sometimes think that I'm sitting there imagining what the universe is like or solving these grand cosmological problems, when really it's just like, okay, there's some problem in Dr. So-and-so's calculations, and your job is to point that out and write a paper correcting it. So that way we contribute to our understanding of this branch of particle theory in this journal. And maybe you'll get tenure afterwards, right?
Yeah,
and
I mean,
slow incremental progress.
Yeah,
and I agree with like Victor's characterization. Sometimes that seems really boring and pedantic, right? But I also think that Eric's right that there's something to be said about that kind of slow, careful scholarship. I mean, it's tedious, but it makes a contribution, right? We shouldn't undervalue it.
No, I totally agree, and I was kind of framing it negatively just to please pills over here. But
This gets to the big point that I have from the start had against academics, and that's that they're publicly funded and they don't do anything for the public. Because if you're niggling, over these tiny little issues in order that you can advance your career by trying to solve a logical contradiction in someone who you know's paper that they put out, and then we get these like tiny minute disagreements, then I'm like, why are you being paid for this? By public funds, by taxpayer money, which they often are. If we can do one last transition, I'm going to compel you, if I may, to imagine
Fuck you.
what is the future of this kind of research and how much does what we're talking about, technological disruption, there's a lot of theory, academic podcasts in politics, in like ours, for example, trying to be that public facing thing. There's a lot of discords to join, online reading groups to join. What part of the university, and it's kind of expensive in a lot of cases, funding model, how do you see this being disrupted? How do you see what you're doing, like doing a podcast like this, for example? How does that fit into a new ecosystem where, in a lot of cases, grad school is just unaffordable, not an option, even if you were to get funding?
So I can start, and I can say that I think it's a good thing. I feel good about broadening the educational ecosystem. As much as I've been saying there are irreplaceable things about grad school, and I still strongly believe that. I think that opening up this platform, opening up like an educational ecosystem to broaden people who are, theory curious or have an aptitude for theory, that's all great stuff. And like, I thank our listeners for being interested, and I hope we're providing something of value to them. They're getting, a glimpse of some of the enjoyments that we have, the appreciation that we have for theory. But I will also say, like, the flip side of it is, already I think there's probably too many people in academic theory. Like, there's too many people getting PhDs, probably. So to some extent, like, I don't know, I feel conflicted about this point, because a part of me feels like elitist about it in a certain sense, and another part of me feels like egalitarian. And I feel like maybe the broadening of this ecosystem is a way to reconcile my kind of elitism with my greater egalitarian values when it comes to academic and theory. Because to some extent, like, maybe with this broadening ecosystem, more people who are theory curious, who like theory, but really shouldn't be doing a PhD because it's not for everyone. This is a nice avenue for those people to do theory in a way that it makes sense, fits into their life. They wouldn't actually necessarily like grad school if they tried to do it, because they don't want to do the game that we've been talking about, right? And it's like, good, those people shouldn't be doing a PhD. So in some ways, like, it's good because this, but on the flip side of that, there's like an elitist part of that, because it's like, I don't want those people. But the other part is like, people who are theory curious should have a place that's quality, that can let them exercise that theory muscle. So to some extent, I think this broadening ecosystem is a way of reconciling those things. And that's kind of the hope, in a way, for me.
That makes theory sound very sexual. I like it. Theory curious.
Theory curious.
I'm a little aroused by that kind of language, actually.
That's fun. Yeah, I'm going to put it in a slightly different way, because I agree with everything you said. So just to kind of build on that, I think that one of the things that we've seen in the last couple of years with the emergence of all these new media is the fact that, contra like the kind of conceit of Plato and a lot of the other kind of intellectual elitists out there, a lot of people are actually really interested in the world of ideas for its own sake, right? And the other people have pointed this out, and there's a clear market for that, and I think that people should cater to that, and I think it's actually providing a useful function beyond just giving people something to do with their day and think about, because it can hopefully elevate the quality of conversation. And I imagine that academics have a role to play there, but I think that two things need to happen on both sides, right? I think that academics need to be better at presenting their work to the public, because for all the reasons we talked about, most of the time we're not, right? Where the people are going to write the little articles about pedantic issues that are of interest to scholars, but of no interest to everyone else, right? And that's fine, there's a place to that, but it's not really all that interesting to people who kind of want big picture stuff. And we can do that better, right? On the flip side, though, I think that sometimes the downside to going too far to try to become a public intellectual or to make these ideas public is that standards get lost, right? And people think, well, these ideas are just, in the public forum right now. Everybody can make use of them however it is that they want. I can use Rawls or Marx to justify this or whatever. And I don't think that's good. I think that we need to try to make sure that we keep our rigorous set of standards when it comes to how these ideas are applied, because that's what makes them useful, right? If all you're going to do is just invoke Rawls or Marx or whatever to make any hyper-partisan point that you're going to make anyway, then what's the fucking point in learning about these things, right? You should be using them to try to think better about things, not just think more eruditely.
In terms of doing it for your own sake, I think if you can do it for its own sake and that's what you want, then don't go to grad school, do that. And I got to shout out to some of our patrons. I don't want to say their names because it's a public episode, but like talking in the Discord, and he's like, well, I read these 4 books in the last month, and I'm like, holy crap, for fun or for, independent intellectual growth. That to me is extremely impressive.
We do have a lot of really, really smart people in the Discord. I totally agree. I should be engaging with it more. Sorry that I'm not, guys.
I think that's extremely impressive. And I would definitely recommend that route, especially to not end grad school with 40,000 student debt. Eric, do you got a response to the topic at hand?
Yeah, those one. Yeah, join our Discord, because those people really, they don't need us. They're fine. They're so smart. They got it going. Like we're just the ones who maybe spent the time to get the lay of the land and then make the recommendations. But they do the work. They don't actually need us.
I think that's one of the huge things that you can't replace by having not gone to school is we sort of know where to look when you need a certain idea. And that's probably from doing comprehensive exams where you have to read like 125 books. You kind of know the area, what to look at first, where to find the references. And that's one thing that you can't just get on your own. That's one thing that a comprehensive exam list forces you to do. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you, Eric.
Like since my undergraduate, I've always been someone who's I'm down for a liberal arts education. I am so down for it. It is so important today that people be educated in a broad range of topics, including history, literature, politics, philosophy, sociology, and learn your grammar and learn your logic and learn some basic mathematics. I'm so down for all of that stuff. And what worries me today is, again, the sort of university that reflects society, and society is functionally differentiated into very specific and specialized roles. And I don't like the way that the university pivots towards those areas, because those are the most lucrative areas, right? Our school does not build new buildings because they think that it's going to attract new scholars to new fields. They build buildings because they get big donations from big pharma, big oil, big chemical companies, whatever. They can get the donations. They can fundraise. All universities now are funded through foundations, which launders monies through a private sphere into a public institution. And it's not good. I don't like it. I've always been down for a liberal arts education. I was first interested in the Renaissance and being a Renaissance man or woman, and that's awesome. And I think that led into the broad liberal arts style. And now we specialize. So that's something I don't like that the university is going towards. And I think specialization, if you have a job at the end of it, go for it. If not, don't do it. Go to English literature, go to politics, go to, literature of any language, comp lit. Go to philosophy. If you don't have a job at the end, but you're someone who's inclined to learn, then go for a humanities degree, go for a liberal arts degree, and take it all the way to the end of the grad studies. But in another sense, like, there's two ways to look at this stuff, right? From our personal experience, we enjoyed grad school and we got a lot out of it. But from like a broader social perspective, you got to look at what sort of function is it serving as a cultural institution and where is it going? And that I'm not super happy with. We have a big bloated administration, and we have unions that are just belligerent and with the best of intentions, but maybe not the best of effects in the real world. Those sorts of things we should oppose, and you should write to your local Congress member or whatever, and tell them that I said this. Tell them I sent you, and that.
That's a radical proposal there.
Yeah, really. Like, get out on the streets and put that letter in the mailbox.
Yeah.
And tell them that education should be free.
And tell them Eric sent you.
Yeah.
Tell them Eric sent you, and tell them that liberal arts education should be a requirement for the first 3 or 4 years of your education at least, because you should not be asked to define what the rest of your life is going to be when you're a 19-year-old person. Because when you're 19 or 18, I'm sorry to our younger listeners, you don't know anything. You don't know anything about the world, but more importantly, you don't know anything about yourself yet.
Absolutely
You
true.
still have growing to do. And deciding, like, I'm going to go into the sciences and be a chemist at 19 years old. Like, okay, fine, you saw Breaking Bad, and that was pretty fucking cool, but that's probably not what you're going to want to do in your mid-goddamn 20s. So don't do it. Go into the liberal arts and then change into something if you like it. Here's me sitting here. I wish I did a mathematics degree. I wish I went into physics. I wish I knew more about quantum physics. Well, I'm learning that fucking stuff now, and I think if I went back and I changed my life and did that when I was 19, I'd be a miserable prick right now, or more of a miserable prick than I already am anyway. So yeah, I think grad school is, I mean, I would say it's a buy. It's something you should do.
Yeah.
But do it for the right reasons. Don't do it because there's a job at the end. Don't do it because your parents pressured you into it. Do it because it's something you want to fucking do.
Yeah, and be aware of what it means. And yeah, you'll go in, you'll end up with an enriched soul but empty pockets.
Right. All right. Well, do you want to do a round of like quick advice?
I mean, we've given a lot of advice, but I guess do you have more specific?
Okay, closing advice. Well, I was told this, I can't remember who by, but it was exactly right. And it is, do not go to grad school if you can see yourself happy doing anything different. If it's the only thing you can do, if you need it, there is a need. I have that need. I need to learn. I always need to be presented with new ideas. But if you don't need it, then don't do it because it's not worth it. If you want a life, if you want to own real estate at some point in your life, if you want to have a family, those are like huge considerations. If those things are going to be what make you happy, don't go to grad school. If you need grad school to make you happy, probably all of us to some degree are on that spectrum. And then you're not going to listen to me anyway. And if you're that person, you should go. Knowing the risks, keeping your eyes open. And I guess my practical advice, following what worked for me, is try to have a professional fallback that you can do when it all goes to shit, or that you can do part-time. If you can do something part-time, if you can do something where you can pick your own hours, for me, it was front-end web development. I was able to do that to basically manage my debt. If you can do something professional while you're doing your studies, that's an excellent way to, keep perspective on the world and not just fall into one thing. But don't have this be your only plan if your only plan is to get a job. If you've got family money, go for it. That's going to be great for you. But otherwise, make sure you have something to make your life worth living when you graduate. As someone who's graduated.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I'm sympathetic. That's good advice in general. Like, I definitely felt a need, although it's funny because for me, my need was maybe kind of operative slightly differently, because for me, it was, there was definitely a need to be engaged with these ideas, but it was also just utter hatred for cubicles and offices, which I had done. I mean, I didn't go back to school until I was like 23, so I had like a gap where I was working and trying to do other stuff, and I just hated that shit so much. So I just like wanted to be somewhere where I could just do my own thing and think about the things I wanted to think about. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'm going to take it a somewhat different route and say that if you want to get through grad school, not necessarily be successful as an academic, but get through grad school, I think there are two dispositions you need to avoid, and these are the two that I see that kill everybody.
Man, where did you get this list from? I'm really impressed.
I thought a lot about it, but like, I spent a lot of time in grad school. But like, number one is people who basically sit there and they treat grad school like it's essentially their undergrad again, where they're just going to have a good time all the time. And the school and their program basically just exists to facilitate them having a good time, right? The second pole that I've seen people go to is the exact opposite, which is basically to be anxious as fuck, constantly be in a state of existential and professional dread, and to think that nothing is going to work out. And these two people might look very different, but they're actually exactly the same, because in my experience, both of them get almost nothing done, right? The anxiety person sits there worrying about everything all days, sleeps until 1 or 2 o'clock, writes panicked notes on Facebook, and doesn't get anything done. The guy who's partying all the time, sleeps in until 2 o'clock in the afternoon because he or she is hungover, writes drunken ramblings on Facebook, then's at the bar at 4 o'clock and gets nothing done. Okay. And that's not to say you can't have a good time in grad school. Lord knows I did. And that also doesn't mean you shouldn't be in a state of existential dread at some point, because Lord knows that happened to me a lot. That was pretty much like 2015 in a nutshell, like with just one fucking long panic attack after another. And then Trump became president, and God knows it was worse, right? But you have to treat it, in my mind, kind of like a job, right? Which is that you should wake up at semi-regular hours. You should commit yourself to trying to read at least a couple hours a day in your field or outside. And then try to at least carve out an hour, maybe two, to do some writing every day on top of your classes and TA. And if you do that, then what you're going to find is not only does your life have a little bit more structure, but that you'll actually start to advance little by little, right? You know, the comps list will get shorter. You'll get a few publications under your belt and you'll feel better about that. Your dissertation will go from being 300 pages to 200 pages to 100 pages. And then you'll get it done and you can move on with your life, right? Which is ultimately what you should do. The ideal person who should go to grad school is somebody who ultimately wants to finish grad school and move on with it, I think. Okay, that's the advice I would give.
All right, Eric, you got anything?
What I would add is that if you're in your undergraduate and you've had a hell of a time, because undergraduate degrees are very difficult and you're probably doing 5 courses a week and it's probably hell. Like, you got to keep your foot on the pedal. And then maybe during your, like, let's make a distinction here. Like, grad school is both master's degrees and PhDs. So, like for me, I had to keep my foot pretty deep on the pedal through my master's too, because it was also a 1-year master's, which is very strange. But then once you get into your PhD, you can actually, like, ease your foot a little bit up off the pedal. It's not as crazy as an undergraduate, mostly because, like, there are courses you have to do, but a lot of it starts to come together and it just feels a little bit easier. You can relax a little bit in your graduate. Like, I feel like I became a little more of a slob in my graduate degree because I wasn't as careful. Undergrad, I was very disciplined. I even, like, monitored my spending. I was like, $100 a week, that's all I'm going to spend. Anything above that is bad.
Only $100 a week on tobacco, no more.
Yeah, $100 a week on booze max. and then once I got into my grad school, I was like, oh, $400 a week. No.
Oh God. This is the advice section. Limit yourself to $400 a week on booze.
And if you're going to drink liquor after beer, make sure that it's clear liquor. You don't want to drink any of that brown stuff.
Yeah, just have a list of quotes in your pocket and you'll get laid. No problem. Yeah. Seriously, though, you could, like, PhD is a little bit of, like, you can ease up off the pedal a little bit.
True,
it's
yeah.
not as crazy as an undergrad, at least in my experience. I don't know about the STEM people, but in the humanities, yeah, it gets a little easier. You meet people. You feel a little more social. I was like a fucking ninja in my undergraduate. I got in, and then when the class was over, I was like, poof, smoke grenade, and I disappeared. But in my graduate, I lingered. I danced a little bit. I stuck around. So,
but that's where you got to turn all that free time into
productivity.
The achievement, the self-achievement, self-commodification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it is important to have fun, right? I mean, it's like anything else. If you're going to grad school, you should be passionate about what you're doing, and you should enjoy what you're doing. Otherwise, like Victor said, you're kind of spending a lot of time for something that's probably not going to make you a lot of money in the long run. So try to find some joy in what you're doing, right? Yeah. If hang out with people that you like, go to the bar and have those conversations with your professor and your friends afterwards. Don't skip out on them because you'll regret it, and you're just going to think back about how stressed you were the whole time. Because, you know, it's a long process, and you have the time and the opportunity to actually have a lot of those kind of conversations that you're probably not going to be able to have, at least at that level of sophistication and with that group of people who are as interested in it as you are any other time in your life, right? So
one stat that I didn't bring up that I think is probably relevant to bring up as a closing remark is that 1/3 of PhD graduates do not get work ultimately in their field. They ultimately leave the field. So, I mean, lots of the times that's probably for a high-paying job, just because you have a PhD, especially if it's in something like poli-sci or English. Then no matter where you go, they know that you know how to write really, really well and how to
Sure.
edit copy maybe. But yeah, if you're doing it as a career step, there are much easier career steps to do. But if you're doing it for the love of the game, then yeah, who are we to say don't do it?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. God, and can I just say all this talk about, like, you know, the memories of being with people at the bar? I gotta say, it's really making me miss you guys in person. You know, I cannot fucking wait till we can all be sitting at a bar and cheersing in person and
I agree. I miss you all.
slapping each other on the back and having some yucks.
We can record this podcast live again.
Yeah,
maybe
I know.
one
God,
time
I can't wait till that fucking day, man.
next January.
I miss that. I miss the phenomenological presence of your bodies.
I-
That sounded slightly sexual.
So even while COVID's
miss my
going on,
body.
though, this is a bit of a good point because there's so much that we didn't know we could do, right? We didn't even know we could do this podcast remotely when COVID started. So finding the other, you know, academic podcasts that are out there, other academic YouTube channels, it's an interesting way to learn, and I'm excited to see where disruption goes. I don't think that people should go to grad school unless it's the only thing that you can possibly do. But if you are capable of independent learning and you have an actual desire to learn this stuff, yeah, you could sign up for 40 patrons for the same price as a semester in grad school, probably.
And patrons, if you want us to, like, grade your papers, you know, like, if that's an interesting idea to you guys, you know, maybe we can make another tier.
I mean, I said I'll put this up anyway, but I brought that up as a joke.
I know.
It would be funny though.
We'll
That
get
would
back
be-
to you in 6 to 8 months.
If there's desire for it, if there's demand, if you want to work on something and have, like, actual PhDs read it and give you feedback, I mean, that's one way to make this somewhat closer. But in any case, we should probably wrap up.
Yeah, we'll get back to you in 2 to 3 business years with some comments.
Oh, we'll just add it to the bottom of the pile of first papers for this semester. So
Yeah.
anyway, thanks guys. Good discussion. I'm really interested in the feedback, so I'm gonna post this. So if this spoke to you, didn't speak to you, you think we're full of shit. In either case, it's good to hear. Maybe you had a different experience of grad school that was just overwhelmingly positive. I don't know. Maybe you're in Norway. Norway sounds like they've got a pretty good
Yeah.
school
Yeah,
system
or
happening.
start like an opposition podcast against us. I can recommend like a name. You can call it the Shill Pod because we're shills, right?
Yeah, don't start an academic podcast because we don't want any competition in the space. So.
You
All right.
Any
Although it's
press is
probably
good.
going to be one of your only options by the time you get to the end of your PhD. Anyway, so on behalf of Pills, Matt, Victor.
Eric?
Enrico.
Oh shit! I was looking at Eric when I said Victor, and I knew something that was wrong. I knew there was something wrong. So, Pills, Eric, Victor, Matt. Thanks so much for hanging out with us, and stay tuned.
Later.
Peace, guys.
Cheers.